Hello, this is my YouTube debut, so I'm not used to doing these videos, so it might be a bit shaky. I'd like to tell you about my son's death following a vaccine, which is quite a long time ago now, 22 years ago in 1995. And why I'm doing it is because deaths and adverse reactions are far more common than we're led to believe, and I'd like people to properly educate themselves before vaccinating, rather than just taking the word of their medical practitioner, the government or mainstream media. I'm going to present some paperwork later on which suggests us possibly a cover-up of what happened, or at least they withheld information. And I think to myself, why would they withhold information? What was there to hide? But first of all, I'll tell you about my son's birth and life. My son Craig was born on the 17th of December 1994. It's quite a difficult birth for my wife. They had to use forceps to get him out, if I remember right. But he was okay after that, and we had the vitamin K injection. I did think at the time, why do they need to give him vitamin K when humanity has survived for millions of years without the necessity to inject vitamins or minerals or chemicals into babies? But I didn't question it, because obviously I thought the nurses knew best. And anyway, yeah, it was a healthy baby. He developed normally for the 5 months that he lived. We had the recommended vaccinations. I mean, at the time I knew no better. I believe the government advice on these things and the GP's advice or the doctor's expert opinion. And everything went okay anyway. Even the vaccines, there didn't seem to be any significant problems with the vaccines. Up until the third DPT, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, a 3-in-1 vaccine that was given back in the 1990s and up to about the just after 2000, I think. Anyway, he had the third DPT vaccine. Within 2.5 days, my wife phoned me at work to say that he was crying a lot, and I went home at lunchtime, but when I was there he didn't seem too bad. In fact, he gave me what I thought was the biggest smile he'd ever given me, but in fact I now believe that it was probably a grimace of pain. You know, I think he was probably suffering at that time, but I failed to realise it. So this was the 19th of May, 2.5 days after the vaccine. I went back to work, which is a few miles away. I think my wife phoned the NHS helpline. There was a NHS helpline at the time, the UK National Health Service helpline, and their advice was, if the baby keeps crying, which we really didn't sort of quite feel that comfortable with, was to put him in the cot basically, and let him get on with crying. You know, if it's going, but my wife, it was afternoon nap time anyway. My wife did put him in the cot, thinking, well, perhaps he needs an afternoon nap. And eventually he quietened down. She became a bit concerned because it was probably a little bit too quiet. After approximately 25 minutes, she went back and found him in the cot, and he was blue, and he stopped breathing. And he kind of, in his struggle, I think he trapped himself between the mattress and the side of the cot a little bit. But later on we was told that wasn't significant by the paediatrician. I wasn't there, I was at work. The first thing I knew about it was when I got home. They tried to contact me, but this was in the time before mobile telephones. So they couldn't contact me, you know, and I was driving home. And I got home to an empty house. And the neighbour informed me, and obviously I rushed to the hospital. Like I say, my wife had found him, and he was blue because of lack of oxygen, I guess, and he'd stopped breathing. The neighbour had kindly tried to resuscitate him. The ambulance had been called. The neighbour failed to resuscitate him. The ambulance was called. The paramedics came out in the ambulance, injected his heart with adrenaline because they couldn't revive him. And I suppose that they thought it was a positive sign that his heart actually restarted with the adrenaline injection. my wife and I believe he was actually dead at that time, and that it was already too late. But obviously, because there was a life sign that his heart had started working again, he was taken to hospital. They put him on life support. You know, he had to help with his breathing, and it's a horrible sight to see your own son, a little baby, you know, and there's wires all over him, a pipe in his mouth, and he couldn't, his body wasn't functioning without that life support. After 4 days, they said that he was brain dead. You know, they confirmed that he was brain dead, and that there wasn't sort of really, they didn't think there was any hope of recovery. We was asked if we'd like to donate his organs, if we'd make the decision to turn his life support off, and if we'd like to donate the organs. Well, in retrospect, at the time, I thought that donating organs was a good idea. In retrospect, I've kind of regretted that, and I don't think that anybody in that position with a dying child is in a good state of mind to make that decision. But anyway, his liver was donated, and it was donated to a girl in Sweden who gained her life through my son's death. So at least something positive came out of the death. And at the time, because he was 5 months old, 2.5 days after the vaccine, when we found he was found in his cot, I had my suspicions that the vaccine might have been implicated in his death. So I asked the paediatrician about, did he think there was a possible vaccine link? This was in the days before computers, or I didn't have one anyway, so I couldn't have researched it myself. I had no computer skills anyway, and that's still not that good today. But the paediatrician, he said that he didn't think there was a vaccine link. Unfortunately, years later, I felt, I did a bit of research and felt that perhaps there was a vaccine link, and I've got some evidence, some paperwork that indicates there could have been a cover-up, as I might have already mentioned. It was too late to go back and ask the paediatrician again, because unfortunately I think he had a heart condition, they said, and he died shortly after my son died, and he was only a fairly young man, which is obviously quite unfortunate. As a little aside at this point that is sort of related to the story, I say an infant death over the time, it's like if you can imagine a nice still calm pond, and the infant death is like somebody throwing a brick into that pond, and the ripples reverberate through time and diminish as they get to the edge, you hope. So it's a devastating impact on a family. 2 weeks after the death, it was probably between 2 weeks and a month after the death, my wife became pregnant again. Although he was under a lot of stress, we still managed to get another pregnancy going. It wasn't it wasn't a plan. This just happened by chance. But then I think it was May, June, July, August. 3 months into the pregnancy, my wife, we believe it was the stress of the infant death that's kind of contributed. She'd had three. This was the third pregnancy in succession as well. Anyway, she had a brain hemorrhage and nearly died. And I found her on the floor in a heap, and she had to have a brain surgery, major brain surgery, to help her recover. And she couldn't. She had to learn to walk and talk again, which took like months and years, really. I mean, she's still got some issues today, some more minor than actually being stuck in a wheelchair. But she can walk and talk now. But it took a long time to get to that recovery. So it's a great thing the doctor did, because she would have died without the brain surgery. He saved 2 lives in one, because my pregnant wife, he saved her life, and my son Gary, who was born in March in 1996. I still had doubts about vaccines, but still believed that the only information I got was through the mainstream media from the GP. So we still believe that it was just an accident, really. We believe what the mainstream told us. I say we had doubts, but we had Gary vaccinated. He always, as far as we can remember, had difficult socialisation, odd interests he developed, and he got in a bit of trouble at school, and I think he was probably bullied a bit as well because he was a little bit odd and different, and he had different interests to the others. And it's a long story. That's another story. He got into a bit of trouble anyway, but he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. We didn't realise that, why we'd had all this trouble. We now believe that he probably had this autistic disorder, but we hadn't really noticed it. We just thought he was probably extremely shy, a little bit different, But he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he was 16. Whether it was the trauma and the medication of my wife's brain injury in pregnancy, that could have contributed to it, or, more than likely the vaccination contributed to it, as it has with millions of other children across the world. Or it could have been a combination of both, But we had a big struggle, and that's possibly another consequence of the sudden infant death back in 1995. By the way, I forgot to present the picture of my son. This is one of the very few pictures I've got. Now I'll jump 14 years down the line. So I've gone through all that time, almost 14 years, with a few doubts in my mind, but still believing in the medical profession. And I was even foolish enough, I think, now to have some flu vaccines myself. Fortunately, it didn't have such a devastating impact on me. I recovered from the feeling sick from those vaccines when I had them. So we'll jump to 2009. Like I say, 14 years after my son's death. 14 years later. And there was a lot of concern about swine flu and the vaccine. And there were a lot of, I did a lot, a bit of research on that. I'd got access to a computer by now, and I did a bit of research on that. And there was a lot of media discrepancies in the story about swine flu. And I won't go into all of that because it'll make this too long a presentation. So it led me to do a bit further research into my son's DPT. I found out there was a lot of oddities and corruptions going on with the swine flu vaccine. So it led me to do a bit of research into my son's DPT vaccine and were there any problems with that. And I found out some quite interesting stuff. And I've since done a lot of further research on it. And like I say, rather than go into the complexities of all that, I'll just tell you what kind of awakened me to some of the... It was Dr. Vieira Scheibner's PhD piece, and she mentions in a PhD piece and some other documents that the pertussis element of the DPT vaccine causes brain swelling and sudden infant death syndrome. Well, on my son's death certificate, one of the things on there is a condition related to brain swelling. So basically, what killed him, what damaged his brain, they said was a condition, I think it's cerebral anoxia or something like that. But anyway, they're all related conditions that basically result in brain swelling, or the brain swelling can result in the lack of oxygen. It's a kind of a catch-22 situation. It could be one or the other. Whether the lack of oxygen caused the brain swelling or the brain swelling happened first, we don't know. But anyway, one of his death was brain swelling and sudden infant death syndrome, both which Vieira Scheibner says and has evidence for and presents evidence in a piece, Adverse Effects of Adjuvants in Vaccines. Both can result from the pertussis element of the DPT vaccine. And I don't know whether you'll be able to read this. That's the section there that tells you about that on her piece, Adverse Effects of Adjuvants in Vaccines by Dr. Vieira Scheibner. And then there was a few other bits of information that I got. An interesting one was the Japanese study from, I think it was from probably the late 1970s or early 1980s. Well, they'd been giving their children the DPT vaccine, recommended by the government, and they realised that there were a lot of sudden infant deaths. Rather than carry on vaccinating children like they did in the UK where I used to live and other Western countries, they decided to defer the DPT vaccine until after 2 years. And the result of that was a 90% drop in the sudden infant death rate. And I'll just read this out. Raymond Abomsawin, MD, he said, this is a quote from him, so he's quite an expert. The delay of DPT immunisation until 2 years of age in Japan has resulted in a dramatic decline in adverse side effects. In the period of 1970 to 1974, when DPT vaccination was between 3 and 5 months of age, the Japanese National Compensation System paid out claims for 57 permanent severe damage vaccine cases. Well, the Japanese government paid out compensation. Well, I've never seen a penny from the UK government, even though they knew when they gave my son vaccination that it was causing sudden infant deaths. I forgot where I was now. During the ensuing period, 6-year period, 1975 to 1980, when DPT injections were delayed to 24 months of age, so they're delayed till after 2 years, severe reactions from the vaccine were reduced to a total of 8, with 3 deaths. This represents an 85 to 90% reduction in severe cases of damage and death. So maybe slightly misrepresented that, because it was an 85 to 90% drop in adverse reactions and deaths, not just deaths. But it's still a significant figure, you know, by deferring that vaccine to 2 years. So, you know, that's a good indication and a good piece of evidence that the vaccine is implicated in causing sudden infant deaths. Now I'll go into some of the paperwork that shows a few discrepancies and probably what sounds like a bit of a cover-up of information to try to stop me from getting to the truth. Like I say, it was 14 years later, and I'd found out a few things about swine flu vaccine and the DPT vaccine and some other pretty bad things about vaccines in general. And with the passing of time, I mean, it was 14. Like I say, it was 14 years. I was thinking to myself, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I got the timing right about the vaccine just before my son's death. So I started to doubt my own knowledge. I knew that I was right in the back of my mind, but I started to doubt myself about it. You know, was I right on the timing of it all? So I decided to write to the local health authority and my local GP practice to find out, just to get confirmation in writing about the vaccination schedule that my son Craig had. Well, he had 3 DPT vaccines as far as I could remember, and the third one was the one that we think was implicated in his death. So I think I wrote a few emails and made a few phone calls, and eventually I emailed the GP surgery where he used to be a patient, briefly a patient, and that's Dr. Asprey and Partners. And I didn't have any complaints about their GP practice, but it's just that this is the letter that I sent. I asked about the vaccine schedule for my son, and this is their response. I say, Dear Mr. Walton, I understand that you are inquiring about the details of all the vaccinations for your late son, Craig, that he may have received. Unfortunately, we do not have access to your son's records. This is quite significant for something that comes up later. So they don't have access to my son's records, they're saying. Once a patient leaves a doctor's list, whether they've moved away, passed on or emigrated, the medical records are returned to the primary care trust, that's the local health authority, who retain them for 10 years. And after this time, they're usually destroyed. So I was lucky they didn't get destroyed anyway. However, records of childhood immunisations are held by Child Services Department at the General Hospital. I believe these records are held for 20 years. Yeah, so I was all right on the timing with that. So that said to me that the hospital records department should still have his vaccination schedule. So that's that letter there, which is not really that relevant to show you. That's that letter there. So I wrote to the hospital records department, as I was advised by the GP practice. they already, there's a discrepancy, because the GP practice has said they retain the records for 20 years, but the hospital says that they retain the records for significantly less time. But it doesn't matter anyway on that. They say, for your information, deceased records are normally retained for 8 years and destroyed under our own destruction and retention policy. However, I'm glad to inform you that we still have access to these medical records, dated from the A&E attendance 19th of May 1995, when my son went to hospital and was eventually pronounced dead. Then it says that I can request these records for a small fee of £40, which I did. I was quite surprised when the records came back. Where is it? The dates. Deceased 24th May they've put down, because it was on life support. Well, we think he was deceased on the 19th, and that's actually what's on his grave. It only lists 2 vaccinations, two, or at least the DPT vaccination, which was along with tetanus, hip polio as well, which he had at the same time. One was for the 14th of March, and the next one was for the 11th of April. There's no mention of any vaccination in May on there, which I thought was very odd. And I thought, well, that kind of backed my feeling that, oh, maybe I was wrong about the third vaccination. Maybe time played a trick on my memory and I was wrong. But anyway, that's what came back, which you probably can't read because I keep shaking. That's what came back from the GP practice, just 2 vaccinations there. I wasn't really satisfied with their response, you know. I just thought that, I suspected, if it wasn't my mind playing tricks, that there was something fishy going on. So I wrote a few more emails, and I got an email back from the Medical Records Department saying, further to your telephone inquiry, I've liaised with our Child Services Department, who have already confirmed that there are only 2 vaccines recorded, and a report has already been provided to you, which I've just shown. If you have any further queries relating to vaccines, it will be necessary for you to contact your GP to confirm whether your son attended any further vaccinations, as we have no record of this on our database. Well, and she says, I'm sorry they've not been able to assist me. Well, the GP told me they didn't have any records and to contact them. So now they're saying that I should not contact them and I should contact the GP. Well, I think I did that. I contacted the GP again, and they assured me that they had nothing on their records. But when children are vaccinated in the UK, they used to get a little red book with a vaccination schedule on it, and it was signed off the vaccinations that you've had. Well, we'd lost that in a move, or we thought we'd lost it. But then, by chance, I was going through some old pictures, and I actually found the red book, and on it was marked 3 vaccinations. So the hospital has said we'd only had 2, but it clearly states, and it's in the same handwriting, that he had one on the 14th of the 3rd, 95, the 11th of the 4th, 95, which is what the hospital admits to, but then it's also got the 16th of May 1995. So I was right, and it made me feel so much better to know that I wasn't going mad, that I was actually right, you know. But there's the excerpt from his little red book, if you can, don't know whether you can see that. So then, obviously, I informed the Hospital Records Department that I now had evidence that that he had been vaccinated, and I sort of said, well, why didn't you tell? You know, surely it must have been there on your records. So I got a letter back from the. Eventually, it took quite a long time and a lot of nagging. This was in 2010 by now. We've moved to 2010, so it's took over a year. This is late 2010. And they say, thank you for your email. I'll need to discuss the vaccination matter further with my manager, but unfortunately he's currently on leave. How convenient. To ask how to proceed, and I'll write to you again as soon as possible. In the meantime, is it possible that you could provide a copy of the Red Book? Well, I did that. I provided a copy of the Red Book. So anyway, they spoke to their manager, And further to your telephone conversation with the health records manager, I've enclosed the printout supplied by the GP surgery. Hang on. They told me, the GP surgery told me that twice that they didn't have any vaccine records and that I had to get them from the hospital. So now the hospital are saying that they got the records from the GP surgery. So somebody's lying here. So either the GP surgery are lying or the hospital records department are lying. It's got to be one or the other, or both maybe, I don't know. So I've caught them out of treat really, haven't I? Because she's enclosed a printout supplied by the GP surgery, so I'm going to show you that in a minute, proving that my son had the third immunisation shortly before he died. Please accept our apologies that it has taken so long to find this information out for you. Well, I'm not sure whether I accept their apology. But that's the letter anyway. And this is the information they sent. This time the third vaccination date is clearly marked on there. And as I said, my son, his death certificate said their conclusion was that he died of prolonged cerebral anoxia, which is basically brain swelling, and sudden infant death syndrome, which, as I said, have been known since the 1970s and early 1980s. Have been a known effect of the pertussis element of the DPT vaccine. So why the hell did they for decades later keep vaccinating children with the DPT vaccine? And this is basically the only other memory we have. A couple of pictures and the grave. That's my son, who would have been 22 now, who died following a vaccine. Like I say, I presented evidence that suggests that they didn't want me to find out any more information that linked his death to the vaccine. So I wonder what he would have been today if he hadn't have been stupid enough to get him vaccinated. And that's why I want anybody that listens to this video to consider carefully before they take the government and GP media advice to get their children vaccinated. But think very carefully about it. Just spend a few hours doing a bit of research on the internet and make sure you know the real facts and not just the propaganda that will be provided to you by the medical profession and media. And thanks for listening. Thank you.